Hello, this is Dr. Tad Thompson, back with Dr. Logan Ulrey. We're going to continue our video series on our experiences in Australia, and today we're actually going to kind of focus on some of the semen standards. Here at RSG, we've always kind of prided ourselves on some of the highest semen standards out there, and I think the kind of the neat part of it is when you go and you actually measure yourself against the global market, you can really look at where we're at, where everyone else is at, and how we can improve that on the small ruminant side. So, Dr. Logan, would you like to talk a little bit about major differences between Australia and here in the U.S.?
Yeah. So one of the major differences we saw a lot more over there is the use of pellets, right? And so if you don't know what a pellet is, pretty much looks like a skittle, but they're freezing semen on a block of liquid nitrogen, and it just forms a little like blob of skittle. They're actually able to freeze 3 breeding doses in a pellet, so they're able to split that pellet across 3 sheep. They use a lot for the domestic work over there. The more of the export work, they do freeze straws, and so then more of the export work goes into a straw, but pretty easy to handle. You can fit a few more into a canister, and so from poking more holes and more sheep, the pellets are probably a bit more efficient to use. Difference between a straw and a pellet, the advantage of a straw is we can actually identify right on that straw what that rim is and the collection date, and get a bit more specific on what that semen is underneath that microscope. So that's one advantage of why we use the straws here at RSG. So, are there any other major differences that you noticed, Dr. Ted, as far as the semen standards and whatnot?
Yeah, I think standard-wise, we monitor and measure things very similar. And as you know, if we don't measure something, how do you evaluate it? And so one of the more interesting experiences over there around semen was the time that I was able to spend at the Semen Research Lab at the University of Sydney. And so they currently have a CASA system for a lot of their research. And I think it was about 6 years ago is when we purchased our CASA machine, and we actually worked with the University of Sydney to set it up to utilize it in small ruminant semen side of it. And interesting, over the last 6 years here, and then confirming that with the University of Sydney, it's great data, and there's a lot of really good information, but we have to be able to directly correlate some of that to how do we improve conception rates. And so kind of sometimes the old way is still the best way, and so back in the early 1980s when Chiz Maxwell and Gareth Evans were working on developing how to freeze semen, what they did was they evaluated morphology, made sure the morphology was right, linear progressive motility, concentration's a big one on conception rates, and so and then actually looking through a phase contrast microscope to make sure that what you're looking at is correct and accurate. Still is kind of the gold standard of how do we make the most of our artificial breeding services, and how do we make the most of our conception rates with frozen semen. So I feel like there was a lot to learn, and there was a lot of confirmation as to what we were doing and how we feel that we're still all on the right track together. So great opportunity, beautiful old university. I got some pictures. They actually have a big quad there, so think about running the quad. Anyway, on our next video series, we're going to talk a little bit about the similarities and differences in animal husbandry and best practices that they use, and how we could potentially implement them here.